the way that was. And I heard Oscar Peterson, the great Oscar Peterson, on television when I was 14. He was on the Dick Cavett show. And I had never imagined a piano being played like that. It was like another world to me. I never conceived of anything like that. And I heard that. And I was a different kid the next day. That's what I want to do. And I was about in 8th grade, so all my friends thought I had taken leave of my senses. One day I was talking about Marvin Gaye and Al Green, and the next day I was talking about this Oscar Peterson guy. And I was changed forever. And so I can say that even in a little remote town like Greenwood, remote as far as being removed from jazz, one can be touched by it. This music has far-reaching, effects, and it's been a great journey.
And then you went way north and went to Memphis, right?
Yeah, it was way north for me.
And Memphis State, and is it right, Memphis State?
Yeah, Memphis
and
State.
That's where you and James and Williams and Donald Brown I'm interested to know a little bit about that. I know y'all got into a bit of trouble at night in the practice rooms, pulling the pianos together in one room and playing. And I know that must have had a big influence on your. Was that where you first started to hear like more modern stuff? Because you've always kind of had a modern.
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me say that coming to Memphis from Greenwood was like coming to New York from Memphis. I saw a building with more than 2 stories. I freaked. Then when you drive into Memphis, there was the big Baptist hospital there. It was, about 15 stories, and that was unbelievable to me. I had never seen a building more than 2 stories. But just that whole episode about leaving Greenwood, it's a big thing for me, coming to Memphis, entering school, and I met 2 or 3 or 4 wonderful pianists, and 2 of them Victor just named, a fellow named James Williams, who more or less, because he was older and everything, he sort of became my mentor. We became fast friends, and James, he was 4 years older, and he was doing everything I wanted to do. He had his own group, and he was writing and arranging for the group, and he had all the hip records and knew all the slick tunes and knew all the standards, and he was the guy to watch, and to follow. So I followed him like a puppy, I wanted to do everything he did. And another one of my colleagues, Donald Brown, who's a year older than I, Donald had been, when I met him, he had only been playing piano less than 2 years or so, but he was already, a couple of leaps ahead of me, and he had this immense grasp of harmony. He had a sound about what he was doing that I was trying to get to, but I hadn't been exposed to it. And he was already doing these wonderful things. And I found it amazing. And Donald, he was already composing really fantastic songs, music, you know, he was just composing, and he had an ear, you know, that was unusually attuned to beauty, you know, it seemed like, and he still today is one of jazz great composers, unknown as he.
What's his name again?
Donald Brown.
Donald Brown.
And both of these gentlemen preceded me in the Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers group. That's a little later in the story, but we all kind of found ourselves in New York. And each of us eventually played with Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers. But Donald, he has a fantastic musical mind. And I always said, Donald hears the beautiful things. And he plays beautifully and he writes beautifully.
Talk loud because everybody can hear me.
Please do.
Pardon?
Please do.
Thank you. I spent a couple years in Vicksburg, which is about 10-15 minutes north of the Delta, Vicksburg, Mississippi. And when I was there, I got involved in some churches, some gospel churches. And the first time I went, I was a little bit late, and the people were singing something very, very beautiful. And the gentleman at the door said, "Sir, nobody goes in during the prayer." And then it was some melody kept going. It was almost like Tad Dameron. It didn't sound like that, but it was kind of rooted in cotton fields, kind of with some blues mixed in. But the melody kept changing, and they kept singing this beautiful thing all together in unison. And the next time I made sure I wasn't late. I wanted to hear that. It was incredibly beautiful. It would break me out in tears when I heard it every time. And they started their service like there wasn't a professional musician in the place, what we call professional musicians. They were just mailmen and river workers and whatever they did. But they all sang this thing in unison, very beautiful. The melody kept changing, and it was I couldn't memorize it. Did you come across that? The question is, did you come across that in the Delta churches? Anything like that?
Well, I'm not sure of exactly what you speak, but we used to have a thing in the black church, for example.
This was big black churches.
Yeah, they call it Dr. Watts hymns. And if any of you are a certain age, you know about Dr. Watts, you know, where the minister or a person leads the chant, and he sings a line, and then the congregation picks up on them and sings that line.
Answers.
Yeah.
Call and
response. Call and response. And it's incredibly moving. It can be. You know. And I did. And usually there's no instrumentation.
Just acapella singing. All in unison.
Yeah, Dr. Watts hymns.
Dr. Watts hymns.
Yeah, that's what they called it. I never found out who Dr. Watts was, but I often wondered if it was there was a man that wrote hymns named Isaac Watts, and I don't know if that's who they referred to or what, but that was that call and response. And that's an incredible thing, you know. I would imagine it goes back to Africa.
Can you talk a little bit about your move from Memphis to New York? I know you said that you and all your friends kind of all ended up playing with the Jazz Messengers, but was that serendipitous, or did y'all put in good words for each other or something? I don't know.
Well, a little of both. My own story is that there was a lot that happened in between in a few years. I left Memphis after about 2 years because I was anxious and eager to get to a more fertile jazz place, happening, and I didn't have any place to go except for my friend James Williams, who was teaching up at Berkeley School of Music. And in Boston, there was a piano teacher that a lot of piano players studied with her. Her name was Madame Shaloff. She was the mother of Serge Shaloff, the great bebop saxophone player that played with Woody Herman. Serge Shaloff. But she was the mother, and she played classical music. And she was this great piano guru around Boston that so many jazz guys studied with. Herbie Hancock. Of course, Herbie was already professional. Whenever he was in town with Miles, he would go by and have a lesson. Keith Jarrett, when he was at Berkeley, he had a few lessons with her. And, some of you young pianists may know about Kenny Warner. He studied with her, and Steve Kuhn, and almost any pianist who arrived on the scene who had studied in Boston, they studied with her. Al Gapper and so many others. And so, because Herbie and Keith Jarrett had studied with her, I wanted to study with her. And in my eagerness to get out of Memphis, at James's invitation, I went to Boston and stayed with him a few months. And of course, you're coming from the South, coming to Boston, I had never been that cold in my life. I was so cold, and I couldn't believe it. And so I stayed in Boston a little while and kind of worked around in the clubs, and had a few lessons with Madame Shaloff. And then after that, running away from the cold, I had a roommate that, a high school buddy who lived in L.A. at the time. So he said, "Man, why don't you come out here?" And so I went running to L.A., on his advice, and, having the image of television in my mind, Hollywood, Los Angeles, it was beautiful sunshine, beaches and all of that. And I don't really know why I went to LA. Well, I don't know then why I made up my mind then to go to LA. In hindsight, I know why, everything has a reason, And so I went to LA, and I lived there a year. And then I got the Duke Ellington Orchestra came to town after I had been in LA a year. And if I backtrack a little bit, before I left Memphis, I had worked in the Ellington Band a couple of weekends, just on the recommendation of a friend of mine that was working with the Ellington Band. So, but I hadn't seen them in more than a year. So I was in LA, and they were appearing at concerts by the sea, a well-known jazz club at the time. And so I just said, I'd like to go by and say hello to the fellas, And I went and said hello, and Mercer Ellington said, "Mulgrew, where have you been? We've been looking for you for 2 years." And I said, "Well, I've been out here about a year." And he said, "Well, give me your number." And so he called me in a few days and asked if I could go on the road for 3 weeks with him, because the guy who was playing piano then, his name was Lloyd Mayers, and he used to do a lot of Broadway shows and singers and things. And, he used to do a lot of money gigs. So he went where the money was from time to time. And so Mercer called me to do 3 weeks. And 3 weeks turned into 3 years. And I was on the road, 3 years with Ellington Band. And so that carried me back, to the East Coast.
Everything I've read about people who played with the Jazz Messengers describe it as an education, that Blakey was a great educator. Could you tell us something about that?
Well, he mostly taught by example, not so much about what he said. Blakey felt like if you were good enough to be in the band, you were good enough to get it together without him badgering you. He never really said a whole lot about the music, unless he had to, which he had to do from time to time, And then he would say things like, don't try to build your career off one solo or something like that. He would advise us against playing too long. He said, because you want the people to clap because you played a great solo, not because you finished. He would say things like that, but it was a learning school for a lot of reasons. First of all, he encouraged us all to become composers, to write, and to write for the band. And that in itself was an education. And, by example, he taught us how to dress, because I was coming out of the 70s. It was still the age of polyester. And I had the whole wardrobe full of polyester. I never owned a wool suit until I played with Art Blakey, And as a matter of fact, there are videos of me playing with Betty Carter, who I played with right before Art Blakey. And in every video, I have these polyester shirts, bell bottoms, Well, I'm glad that age is over. And Art. But the main thing I learned from Art, as well as every other great band leader I played with, Betty Carter, Woody Shaw, Tony Williams, was the thing about presentation. How to present the music. In other words, you don't want to get on the bandstand and play for people and have it sound like a jam session. People come to hear a certain kind of thing, and you want to present the music a certain way. And that was probably the main thing. And also observing him just being a great band leader. He was just he had the right sensibility about most things. When it comes to running a band, he traveled on the road with us. He drove as much as the rest of us did, And it was something to see. I'll get to you, but I think somebody told me.
As a rhythm section man, how do you relate or want the bass and the drums to relate to your playing? What do you expect of the rest of the rhythm section, or appreciate from them?
Well, I think fundamentally, I expect the same thing that most of anyone would expect. And that is, the drummer has to have a good beat. That's first and foremost. The bass player has to play in tune and play the right notes. You know, and he has to have a good beat and good time also. If I got that, I can have a good time. You know, I don't necessarily have to have a virtuoso on either one. You know, that's a plus. If you get that, that's wonderful. But if you get a drummer that plays good time, a good beat, a bass player that plays a good beat and the right changes, that's a big help. Now, the next thing I like to hear from a drummer is whether he's a good interpreter. You know, a lot of young guys don't really know that because it hasn't been pointed out to them. You know, when they listen to Art Blakey records, Art was such a great interpreter. But so was Philly Joe, and so was Roy Haynes, and so was Elvin, and so was Tony Williams, and all the great ones. That's something they had in common. They're great interpreters. And I got to see that firsthand, you know, playing with Art Blakey, because he was amongst probably one of the greatest. You know, in other words, what I mean by that is, say for instance, if we brought in a song that we had written, and Art wasn't a great reader, but he would sit back and say, okay, you all go up and play it once. And we play the melody. And he said, okay, play it one more time. Play it again. And then he said, okay. He'd come up and play, you know, drums on it. And he would do things to that melody that would be just incredible. I mean, things that you would never imagine. You know, I have a song that I wrote while I was with the Messengers called Second Thoughts. And it's not a very rhythmic song. It's largely sustained notes, whole notes, and very, very few rhythmic phrases in it. But I remember him doing that when I brought it in. He said, play it once or twice. And when he came up to play it, he did things with those sustained notes that I couldn't imagine. And even today, when I play that with other drummers, I still listen for those things that Art Blakey did, you know. It was just incredible, you know. And, you know, Roy Haynes has that same thing. When they play melody, it's something else. You know, it's not just you count it out 1, 2, 3, 4, and they just play ting, 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 ting. You know, because a lot of drummers do that. You know, they just play the time and wait for the solos and that. But those guys can make so much music out of the melody. You know, and plus, you know, we have to remember Art Blakey came from the big band days. He was a big band drummer, and that was essential to big band drumming. Just to play the arrangement, you know. So, but Art can make an instant arrangement of, you know, in a moment, you know. And yeah, it's so great. As a matter of fact, there are a few guys from New Orleans that were Messengers, you know, and if you get us together, we talk about Art Blakey all day. He was such a colorful character. You had a question, man?
Yeah, I was just wondering, did you develop about this idea of presentation on stage? When you were saying about presenting the music to the audience, what does that consist of?
Well, it consists of having a program of music that you have rehearsed, and there's some concept of presenting this piece of music. There's some band concept, and with Art Blakey, part of the concept of the Messengers was that it was a big band concept pared down to a small group. Because Art was a big band drummer, and that was part of the whole sound. He just did all this wonderful stuff, for a small group, and he had very talented and visionary composers in the band. Benny Golson, Wayne Shorter, and Freddie Hubbard, and Bobby Timmons, and so the band had always had music that was going to be presented in a certain fashion, and that is, I guess, to a degree, and a sort of adherence to show business. And they believed Art was one of those guys who he believed that you weren't just an artist, you were in show business. So.
What do you require you to memorize the music? I mean, was that part of to see if you could play without reading?
Yeah. Well, but if you were good enough to be in the band, you were good enough to memorize the music for the most part. By the time I had gotten into the band, he had such a history of library. Had such a large library of music that sometimes. You had to go back and research if he was going to call something. Mm-hmm. And one time in Boston, I was in the band, and we played in Boston. We hadn't been playing New York, since I had been in the band. So it had been about 2 years at this point. And we came to Boston, and Donald Brown was in the audience. And he called New York. I was lost. And Art, being somewhat from the old school, he felt that if you didn't know it, you will hear it. So he said, and Terrence said, Art Mulgrew doesn't know it. He said, he'll hear it. Well, this piece of music I'm talking about is really complex and very involved harmonically,
Oh, Donald's tune. Oh, yeah. That's bad.
So I don't ever want to hear a band leader say he'll hear it. Somebody had a question.
I just.
I'll take it.
I guess it might be after a bunch of questions, but I just wanted to hear one of your original compositions. That you like to play. Either solo or trio or
Okay, I'll do that.
Yeah.
So some of the questions I had have kind of been answered, like your time with Art and what you look for within a drummer, because I play drums. But can you talk about maybe playing with Tony Williams a little bit? If that's cool with everybody. And I was also and like, also like your concept too, because I'm sure people want to know about your, like, your concept. But just, I don't know, there's a million questions, but I'd really like to hear about Tony, like, maybe a little bit about playing with Tony Williams.
Well, let me say, if I ever met Superman, it was Tony Williams. It was the most unbelievable, almost supernatural musician that I've ever met. You know, I mean, wow. When I first joined the band, I just couldn't believe how good he played. You know, great, you know, because I had already played with Blakey and some other drummers, but when I got on the bandstand with Tony Williams, it was like, it's indescribable. It was so much technique, so much power, so much intelligence, and sophistication of concept, and as I went on and develop a relationship, and I was able to see the type of intelligence it was, and to see how he applied it to his music. I mean, his involvement with music was so deep, you know. There was so much that he wanted to do. He was just incredible, you know. So inspired. I mean, this is a man that every night, I was with him 6 years, every night, it was amazing. Every night. But dig this, amazing was just the starting point, you know. So if it didn't go any further than that, it was still amazing.
Would you be like, oh my God, I'm playing with Tony Williams?
Oh, I have a story about that too. Yeah. Well, the thing about this becomes another thing, but when I was playing with Tony Williams, you know, he's coming, doing all this amazing stuff on the drums.
This when he had the big drum set, like, yeah, he was using the whole.
Yeah. I really had a complex. I had a Herbie Hancock complex because I didn't sound very much like Herbie. I had listened to him quite a bit and learned from him, as I did McCoy Tyner and Chick Corea, but I didn't figure I sounded a lot like Herbie, and I had a pretty a complex about it, you know. Man, this cat can come out here every night and listen to me play piano, you know. And after playing all those years with Herbie, you know. And this went on for a couple of years or so, and I just felt so on everything, you know, inefficient. I just did, you know, but at the same time, I didn't really want to sound like Herbie.
Yeah.
He sounded great. He said, you know, I probably would have if I could have, but I didn't believe that I should sound just like him, you know. But still, I had this complex, you know. And so I carried this complex around for a couple of years, you know. And then on tour one time, we found ourselves in Chicago. We were playing at Joe Siegel's Jazz Showcase, you know. And so I have a friend in Chicago who He's a bit older than me. As a matter of fact, I met this guy in high school, and he lived in Chicago, but he played trumpet. Well, really, he owned a trumpet. There wasn't much of a guitar player. But this guy, very nice guy. He knew all about the history of Chicago. Anything you wanted to know about Chicago, he had it down. And but he liked to talk. And the nickname that his friends gave him was Mouth. So Mouth called me one morning, and he said, Mulgrew, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm just laying up in the bed, chilling, And he said, why don't you let me come and pick you up and take you around Chicago and show you, a lot of interesting places and, some interesting things about Chicago. I said, oh boy, we got to deal with Mouth all. So, I thought, well, okay, it's a Sunday morning and I'm not doing anything. So I told him, okay. He came back to pick me up and he drove me around Chicago. And I tell you, Chicago is really one interesting place if you really get to see it. Like New Orleans is, it's just something to see. But he drove me into a neighborhood called Hyde Park in Chicago. And Hyde Park is the home of Herbie Hancock. It's where Herbie grew up. And it was in Herbie's time, in the 40s and 50s, and the early 60s, it was upper middle class black neighborhood mostly, And I was riding around, and in my mind's eye, I could see what the neighborhood looked like and get a feel for it in Herbie's time, And a lot of prominent black people still live there, Muhammad Ali had a house there, Louis Farrakhan, some others, And I know that Herbie in his upbringing, he had certain things that were culturally beneficial. For instance, he played with the Chicago Symphony at 11 years old. Some kind of Haydn piece of Chopin or something. He played with the Chicago Symphony at 11 years old. Some kind of children's program. And you can see that, the schools and everything probably at that time were just superior to other schools. And just an upbringing that was on another level, And I took a look at that and I said, wow, this is Herbie Hancock, This is why he plays like he does. Because of the way he was brought up, that cultural upbringing, where his intelligence was cultivated and all of that, He had access to all of the cultural things, classical music and whatever else have you, And I said, well, this is why Herbie Hancock plays like this. And then I said, that has nothing to do with me. I didn't come from that. I came from Greenwood, Mississippi, cotton fields, Methodist and Baptist churches, and there was nothing like a symphony orchestra, marching band, concert band was probably the closest we had to. I said, it would be a complete lie for me to get on the bandstand and sound like Herbie Hancock. And I said, Herbie Hancock is telling his story. Now you've got to find out what your story is and be truer to it. Now, I was pretty much telling my story anyway, but I wasn't at home with it. I felt like I should have been doing something else, and so I decided at that moment I was going to tell my story through the music. And,
During your time with Tony, yeah.
Huh?
Well, this is with Tony, yeah.
And so
The concept thing and the Tony thing, kind of.
Yeah, so right then and there, I resolved my complex about that. I said, because Tony hadn't complained to me about what I was doing. It was just that thing I was living with, And so that's part of that. And then a couple of weeks later, I went back to New York and, made my rounds. On a night off, you go to different clubs, and I made my rounds one night, and I went to 3 clubs and heard 3 different piano players. They were all young and very talented, very good. They were all trying to sound like Herbie Hancock, and not one was close. Not one was close. And they all sounded like 3rd-rate or 4th-rate Herbie Hancocks, And so I said, wow, I'd rather sound like a 1st-rate Mulgrew Miller than a 4th-rate Herbie Hancock. And don't get me wrong, if I could sound like a 1st-rate Herbie Hancock, I probably would. I mean, I think the world of Herbie, but that was one of the greatest lessons I learned, that you have to be you. You have to tell your story.
So what if a guy's from like the middle of the desert? Does he
Is that a story?
Say it again.
I said, what if a guy's from the middle of the desert and he grew up around no culture whatsoever?
Well, I was almost there.
Nowhere, man.
I was pretty close.
Do you find that that's kind of being lost today, where, like the thing you just described, where so many people try to imitate someone else, and it seems like it's always been historically like you were expected to be yourself and have your own concepts.
I mean, but don't get me wrong. There was always that element, though. Mm-hmm. There were scores of Charlie Parkers. People wanted to be Charlie Parker.
Right.
And I mean, it's quite natural that someone so brilliant would be influential. I'm not knocking that, it's quite understandable why 100,000 young piano players would want to play like Herbie Hancock. It's the slickest thing out, So, but I think maybe because the way the music is taught today and so forth and so on, individuality is not encouraged, and I have a close kind of I have close feelings about this because I'm a teacher also, and I always try to make sure I don't direct the student in that way. I don't encourage the student to only listen to this, only listen. I encourage the student to listen to everything. Keep your ears open and take in everything, and then give him the option of what he wants to sound. And still, his education has barely started because it doesn't really start until he gets out and he has to play in front of an audience. Then you feel like, then you'll know what's what, you know. All those transcriptions you play, sometimes you have to know how to make music out of it. You had a question at one time.
Yeah, well, I was going to wait to the very end because probably nobody else is interested in this. This lady you mentioned in Boston, Madame Shortkoff?
Shaloff.
You said she was a classical pianist, and all the jazz guys went to her for a few lessons. What would she offer them? What would she teach them?
Well, she was, as I mentioned, her son.
Yeah, bebop.
Sir Shaloff. So she had a certain kind of empathy for the jazz musicians, you know, and a lot of pianists at that time had not really studied, you know, as much as they do now, I think.
Oh, okay.
You know, I mean, it was out of the ordinary to hear a virtuoso in those days, you know. Now they come dime a dozen. You know, I hear pianists 20 years old, I mean, from everywhere. They can do amazing things on the piano.
Oh, I see, okay.
Yeah, but she had a special thing. Conceptually, what she taught was to make the piano sing. That's what her big thing is, to make the piano sing. Because a lot of pianists at that time wasn't thinking about that. You know, they kind of approached the instrument as it is, as a percussive instrument. You know, and so to develop a technique and a mental concept of having the piano sing, that's
Okay. Cool. Thanks.
yeah.
This young man has a question.
Can you talk a little bit about playing solo piano and how you might treat standard tunes? How you prepare maybe for a solo piano?
Yeah, well, I don't necessarily feel like that I'm all that equipped to be an authority on the solo piano, because I do it, you know, but it's not something I work on, you know, a lot, really. And so I guess basically what I can say is, you know, my solo piano playing, hopefully, it sort of reflects the music I've heard, you know, from Art Tatum and Oscar Peterson and Hank Jones and others that have played wonderful solo piano, and it reflects the things I know, you know, and so basically it reflects all that I know about the piano, and you know, so I don't know if there's a singular path that every pianist should go down, you know. And apparently they haven't, because Bill Evans didn't play solo piano like Oscar Peterson or Bud Powell, you know. Bud Powell didn't play solo piano like Oscar Peterson. And so you have to, I guess one solo playing would reflect how they feel about the instrument.
I remember hearing you play when I take a walk, or was it Tatum?
Would you like to take?
Would you like to take a walk? I mean, you must have been in your early 20s, and you were playing like Tatum and stuff back then. I mean, maybe it was. I mean, was it through transcription? Was it through osmosis?
It certainly wasn't through transcription.
I remember you saying one time that you, when I was working on a transcription, that you hadn't really gone about it that way. That you had read some, but that I guess through just...
Yeah, transcription was not a thing that I really got into. Now, but I will say this. Either whether you are a transcriber or not, you have to listen. You know, and by listening, transcribe means to write. You write down what you hear. And the only difference is I didn't write down what I heard. But I heard it. So I guess in a way you kind of miss out because even though you understand it at the time, you may not necessarily remember things in a chronological order. Like for instance, I can't play you 8 bars of no one solo. Not even my own. But there's some solos on record that I've studied over and over and over, and I make sure that I understand what they're doing when they're doing it. You know, when I'm hearing it, but I never copied it and tried to make it my own. You know. Yeah. Would you like to take a walk?
Right, that's a beautiful setting.
Yeah, but before I graduated high school, I had an Art Tatum record, and I used to put it on when I went to bed. And in those days, they had the turntables that played the record and then automatic, and then you would go back to the front, and so all night I was hearing this record. You know? And I woke up in the morning and it was still playing. You know? So I guess sort of subconsciously or whatever it is, it might have slipped in there some kind of way.
You've done a lot of recording. Are there any techniques that you have when in a studio? Are there any techniques you have to try and bring what you play on the bandstand?
Are there any techniques?
So I can adjust to different studios and things.
There is an adjustment, but I wish I could say yes. I wish there were some techniques that I knew that would help me, because I've really had a kind of a hard time with the studio kind of thing, and all I can tell you that it has gotten better through experience, of doing so many records and doing it over and over and over and over, till now I'm fairly comfortable in the studio most of the time, but I've really had a rough time with that, you know, and I don't know, it must be something in each musician's personal psychological makeup, because I mean I know some guys come into the studio and they play like they play at home, or, you know, in the clubs, and but some musicians now. I'm friends with the record producer Orrin Keaton, who used to own Riverside Records, and he said two of the musicians that were difficult in the studio were Sonny Rollins and Wes Montgomery. And they were not that comfortable in the studio. And you wouldn't know it from listening to their records, though. So all I can say that just having done it, having done it over and over through the years. Plus, just becoming more confident through experience of playing. You know.
Hey, how did you, what was the process, I guess? I mean, did you develop your sound when you were young? Or I got to hear you with Tony, and I got to hear Blakey, and I know they were loud. So I don't know, and having a big sound is not necessarily loud, but I mean, was it early technique that you had that, I mean, you have awfully big hands, and you're a big fella, so I don't know if it's that, or is it something that you know, how do you maintain, how'd you build your sound? Was it something you've heard in your ear and developed?
That's a good question, because I've never, said that I had a big sound. To me, I don't have a big sound. You've
heard other people say it.
Huh?
You've heard other people say it, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I'm always surprised by that, you know. It's never big enough for me. But I'll say this, your sound sort of reflects what you hear in your head first. You know, the sound that you hear, and when you strongly hear a sound, I think your body makes the adjustments to produce that sound. That's first. But there must be certain kind of practice, you know. And I know for sure that through practicing, that helped my sound.
Anything in particular? I know
No.
that diminished thing, that's a great
Well,
chop
that's
builder,
one of the
you know,
greatest things. But you know, in different phases, I've gone through different things. But that's one of the biggest things that help my technique. This set of exercises by Isidore Philippe. You see, I'd gotten to a point that I didn't feel like Hannon was no longer helping me, you know. And so, and I forget who turned me on to this, but this book of exercises, it's all in diminished chords. The key is you hold some notes down while you raise the others. And so you do it chromatically, and it builds your technique. And I found for me it helped my sound too. But above all, it reflects what you hear in your head. You know, if you don't hear a big sound, you're probably not going to get it. Anybody else?
You're obviously better than you were when you started playing the piano, but was there a period where you improved drastically over a small period of time, or was it more gradual?
It was basically gradual, but there was a phase where I think I made leaps, and that was a phase where I was playing a lot in New York at a club called Bradley's. And you see, because up until that time, I had mostly been playing in bands where I was a sideman. So I never got to play melodies. You know, I knew all these songs and didn't know any in the melodies, especially in the bridge. So, you know, I knew all the right changes and everything, but I couldn't play any melodies. And, so when I got to do these kind of gigs, I was, you know, doing duo, me and a bass player, or trio gigs, and I was playing the melodies more. And Bradley's was a kind of a place. It was, you had to do your best because you never knew who was sitting out there. You've been playing, and there was a table at the end of the piano. You might be playing, look up, and Tommy Flanagan or Kenny Barron would be standing at the bar, and so on and so on. So it was never, you could never really, relax about what level you were playing on. So I think I grew a lot during those years. And not just Bradley's, but there was a couple of other clubs in New York like that. But playing duo, I think it developed certain strengths.
You know Don Poe very well?
Fairly well. Don Pullen used to call me Killer Miller. And I used to call him Fist of Fury. He had, and yeah. Okay. Really?
You're going to play us a tune?
Yeah. Okay. Quite some years ago, when you travel on the road, so many things happen. And one of the greatest things about being a musician, or any other kind of person, is the chance to travel. You just learn so much and experience so much. And when you travel, you run into all kinds of people that knows all kinds of things. You see all kinds of sights, and I dare say, if anybody goes on the road for 20, 30 years and still remains the same person he is at that 30 years, he didn't do it right. After you've seen the world many times and seen different kinds of people, you should be a different type of person when you come away from that experience. That is, unless you had that kind of experience growing up in a kind of cosmopolitan kind of situation, which a lot of us don't have. I came up in a little town. I lived on one side of the tracks, and that's all you were exposed to. Well, you take that, that was good. But, you have all of those other broadening kind of situations. And so, anyway, I ran into people that were reading all kinds of books, and religious and philosophical books and all kinds of things. Well, as a result of that, I had a sort of a revelation about dogmas, D-O-G-M-A-S, and how we are stilted by dogmas. And anyway, I said that as much as possible, I was going to do away with dogmas. So I wrote this tune called Farewell to Dogma. Hope I can play it.
I just ask what would be your top 3 favorite books?
My 3 favorite books?
Yeah, or one. Whichever.
Oh, wow, that's a tough one. I can tell you the book that has